7 minutes. That is the number, not the number of drones, not the number of sailors injured, not the number of hours the carriers were missing from radar. 7 minutes is the number that changed everything that happened that morning in the Northern Arabian Sea. And if you understand what happened inside those 7 minutes, you will understand something about modern naval warfare that almost no one watching the headlines has figured out yet. Here's what the headlines said. Iran launched drones. Carriers survived. American victory. Here is what the headlines did not say. Both carriers vanished completely. 2 nuclear-powered ships, each one longer than 3 football fields, each one visible on radar from hundreds of kilometers away, simply ceased to exist on every radar screen in the theater for 11 consecutive hours. And while they were invisible, their aircraft kept flying. Strike missions, combat air patrols, electronic warfare, full operational tempo, from ships that did not exist on any radar screen that Iran could see. That is not a headline. That is something else entirely. Stay with me, because I am going to take you through every minute of what happened, and I promise you that by the time we get to the end, the way you think about carriers, about drones, about what winning actually looks like in this kind of conflict will be permanently different. Let me start with the weight of what was in the Northern Arabian Sea that morning, because if you do not feel the specific mass of the target Iran was shooting at, the rest of this story does not land the way it should. The USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower operating in the same theater simultaneously, 2 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, between them somewhere between 140 and 150 combat aircraft, FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, E-2D Hawkeyes, F-35C Lightning IIs, 2 ships generating between 250 and 300 combat sorties per day at sustained operations tempo. That number, 300 sorties per day, is more than the total daily sortie rate of most regional air forces on Earth. 2 ships doing that. Moving, unfixable by any land-based targeting system. Surrounded by a surface screen of guided missile cruisers and destroyers carrying somewhere between 800 and 950 vertical launch system cells loaded with standard missiles, tomahawks, and anti-submarine rockets. That is what was in the Northern Arabian Sea. That is the target Iran decided to shoot 500 drones at. Now here's the math that makes 500 drones the weapon that it actually is, because most people look at that number and think firepower. They are wrong. 500 drones is not a firepower problem. It is a mathematics problem. A Shahed 238 Kamikaze drone costs between $75,000 and $120,000. A standard missile, the SM-2 or SM-6 rounds that are the primary anti-air weapons in those VLS cells, cost between $2 and $4 million per round. Every time an American ship shoots a standard missile at one of those drones, the cost exchange ratio runs between 17 to 1 and 53 to 1 in Iran's favor. 500 drones engaged primarily by standard missiles would expend somewhere between 400 and 500 interceptors. That represents between $800 million and $2 billion in American munitions expenditure against a drone wave that cost Iran somewhere between $37 and $60 million to produce and launch. The drones are not trying to sink the carriers, they are trying to empty the magazine. They are trying to make the question of the next wave a question about what is left, rather than a question about capability. Every officer in both strike groups doing their job that morning understood that math. And understanding it is exactly what produced the decision that made both carriers disappear. The wave architecture Iran used was not simply a large number of identical weapons pointed in one direction. It was engineered geometry. 3 separate launch categories across a 200-kilometer front. 140 drones from fixed coastal battery positions north of Bandar Abbas. 180 from fast attack craft and modified vessels in the Northern Arabian Sea, creating approach vectors from the southwest that the carrier defensive formation was not oriented to prioritize. The remaining 180 from mobile transporter erector launchers along the Makran coast, a launch axis the American defensive posture had assessed as a secondary corridor and had covered with proportionally lighter defensive resources. 3 axes, 500 contacts. Each drone flying at approximately 350 kilometers per hour at between 50 and 200 meters above the sea surface using sea-skimming flight profiles that complicate radar detection beyond 30 to 40 kilometers. And the wave was not launched simultaneously. The 3 packages were timed to converge on the carrier's estimated positions within a 4-minute window, meaning the defending ships would face the first contacts from the primary axis approximately 4 minutes before 360 additional contacts from 2 additional vectors arrived. 4 minutes of engagement-consuming interceptors, phalanx ammunition, and operator cognitive load before the flanking packages closed from directions the formation was already stretched to cover. That is not a weapon. That is a system designed to produce a specific decision. And the decision it was designed to produce was the one both carrier commanders made. 7 minutes after the drone wave appeared on American radar screens across the theater, both carrier strike groups executed a maneuver that removed them from the threat equation entirely. Here is what that maneuver was, piece by piece, because each piece is remarkable in ways the summary does not capture. The Gerald R. Ford class can achieve speeds in excess of 30 knots when its A-1B nuclear reactors are at maximum output. 30 knots is approximately 55 kilometers per hour. In 7 minutes at maximum speed, a carrier displaces its position by approximately 6.4 kilometers from its last known location. Iranian drone targeting solutions are not computed against a moving target. They are computed against a specific coordinate, and that coordinate is updated by surveillance data that carries latency. The latency between the last Iranian surveillance update and the moment the drones arrive is the margin the carriers are exploiting. 6 kilometers of position change in 7 minutes is enough to put the drone wave's terminal approach geometry into empty water. Both carriers executed simultaneous course changes at maximum power in diverging directions. The Ford displaced approximately 6.2 kilometers to the northwest. The Eisenhower displaced approximately 6.5 kilometers to the southeast. The two ships, which had been operating approximately 80 kilometers apart, were now 93 kilometers apart on a dramatically different axis than the Iranian targeting solutions had computed. The drone wave was heading toward two coordinates that no longer had a ship at them. But a carrier that is moved is still a carrier that shows up on radar at its new position, unless the second part of the decision is working simultaneously. In the same 7-minute window, both carriers executed a complete Electromagnetic Emissions Control protocol, MCON Alpha, the most restrictive level, in which every non-essential emitter aboard the ship is shut down. Radar, navigation transponders, AIS, non-essential communications, the electronic signature of a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in normal operations is enormous. Hundreds of emitters producing a distinctive and trackable electromagnetic profile visible from hundreds of kilometers. In MCON Alpha, that signature collapses to the minimum physically unavoidable emissions from the nuclear plant and the essential communications the ship cannot function without. Not zero, but small enough, combined with a 6-kilometer position change, to fall below the detection threshold of Iranian surveillance drones operating at the altitudes and ranges they were flying, and then the active deception. Each strike group carries electronic warfare assets, specifically the EA-18G Growler and dedicated electronic warfare pods on surface vessels that can generate false radar returns at specific coordinates. In that 7-minute window, both strike groups deployed a deception package that generated simulated carrier electromagnetic signatures at the last known carrier positions. A drone's terminal guidance system homing on a large radar return at an expected coordinate does not perform detailed signal analysis. It homes on the largest return in the vicinity of the expected coordinate, and the deception packages were generating returns large enough to be the most attractive targets in the area where the Iranian targeting solutions expected the carriers to be. When the leading edge of the 500 drone wave arrived at the carrier's last known positions, both ships were 6+ kilometers away, running completely dark, and the drones were homing on electromagnetic ghosts. Now here's the question that changes this story from remarkable to genuinely extraordinary. If both carriers were running full MCON Alpha, no radar, no AIS, no transponders, no non-essential emissions, how were they still flying combat missions? Because they were. For 11 hours, while both carriers were running dark at locations unknown to Iranian surveillance, both Airwings continued operating. Strike missions were launched. Combat air patrol was maintained. Electronic warfare assets continued flying. Tanker aircraft continued supporting the strike packages. The answer has 4 components, and the 4th one will be studied in naval warfare colleges for the rest of this century. First, pre-mission coordination. In the hours before the drone wave, the Airwings mission cycle for the following 12-hour period had been fully coordinated and distributed. Every pilot had their mission package. Every tanker track was pre-briefed. Every communication protocol for the dark operations window was established before the first drone was ever launched. The Airwing was not navigating the 11 hours in real time. It was executing a plan built in explicit anticipation of the carrier going dark. Second, the E-2D Hawkeye, 2 of them, one from each carrier, remained airborne continuously during the 11-hour dark period, essentially flying command centers operating in low probability of intercept radar modes, providing the battle management function that the carrier's own systems were not emitting to provide. The Airwing was not flying blind. It was flying with a deliberately constrained command and control architecture designed to accomplish the mission while giving away as little electromagnetic information as possible about where the ships actually were. Third, geographic separation between strike missions and actual carrier positions. During the 11 hours, all aircraft launch and recovery operations were conducted at positions chosen specifically because they were far enough from the carrier's dark running positions that any recovery operation visible to Iranian surveillance would not disclose the carrier's actual location. Recovery positions were chosen to be spatially consistent with the deception package. Iran, watching aircraft recover to specific coordinates, was watching aircraft appear to recover to the ghost signatures, not to the actual ships. Fourth, and this is the component that reframes everything else. The screen ships, the cruisers and destroyers, did not go dark with the carriers. They maintained normal emissions. They continued to appear on Iranian surveillance as a carrier strike group screen in approximately the right formation geometry relative to the deception signatures. Iran's surveillance picture showed a screen in the right formation relative to fake carrier positions. It showed aircraft recovering to those positions. It showed the electronic profile of a carrier strike group operating normally. Everything about the picture said the carriers were where the deception said they were. The carriers were not there. Now I need to tell you what Iran actually got from this operation, because it was not nothing. And what it got tells you more about where this conflict is going than the tactical outcome does. 500 drones homed on empty water. 0 hits on either carrier. By the immediate military scorecard, this is an American tactical victory and an Iranian operational failure. That is accurate in describing what happened that morning. It is incomplete in describing what that morning means for what happens next. Iran now knows the MCON Alpha execution time. The window between threat detection and full electromagnetic silence was 7 minutes. That number has specific implications for the design of future drone waves. A wave that covers the distance from detection range to carrier position in less than 7 minutes, a wave launched from closer range or using faster drones, is a wave launched before the carriers can complete their electromagnetic disappearance. The 7-minute window is now a targeting parameter. Iran also knows the deception signature characteristics. The electromagnetic ghost generated by the carrier's deception package was observed by every Iranian surveillance asset in the theater for 11 consecutive hours. 11 hours of recording the deception signature's frequency, amplitude, temporal variation, and positional stability. Against a drone that homes on a radar return, 11 hours of observation is sufficient for an adversary's electronic warfare engineers to characterize exactly what differentiates the deception from a genuine carrier signature. The next drone wave designed against these specific deception packages will contain a seeker filter capable of distinguishing the ghost from the real ship. Not next week, but the data collected over those 11 hours is being analyzed right now by exactly the people who need it. Iran knows the screen ship behavior during dark carrier operations. The cruisers and destroyers maintained their emissions while the carriers went dark. Their positioning relative to the deception signatures, their communication patterns, their radar operation modes during those 11 hours, all of it observed and recorded. A screen ship that behaves differently when its carrier is running dark versus when its carrier is operating normally is a screen ship that tells an attentive observer the carrier has gone dark. Those specific behavioral signatures are now in Iranian intelligence hands, and they will be used to develop indicators that distinguish a real carrier from a deception package in future operations. And Iran knows the aircraft recovery geometry. The positions at which aircraft recovered during the 11-hour period, correlated with the deception package positions and the screen ship formation geometry, give Iranian planners a spatial model of how carriers position themselves relative to their screen during dark operations. That spatial model constrains the search volume for a future targeting solution against a dark-running carrier. If you know the carrier is likely within a specific radius of the deception position in a direction away from the primary threat axis, the search problem gets dramatically smaller even when the carrier has gone completely dark. There is something else I need to tell you that the carrier survival narrative makes easy to miss. The screen ships stayed. They maintained their positions and their emissions as part of the deception architecture. And in maintaining those positions, they remained in the path of 500 drones whose terminal seekers at the moment of final acquisition were not all drawn cleanly to the deception signatures. The outer edge contacts on the flanking axis acquired the strongest radar return in their terminal seekers' field of view at the point their guidance activated. For some of those drones, the strongest return in the field of view was not a ghost, it was a guided missile destroyer. The USS Delbert D Black, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer in the forward screen, was struck by 3 Shahed 238 contacts in a span of 40 seconds. The impacts were in the aft superstructure and hangar bay. The ship is not sunk, it is mobile. Its combat systems are degraded but operational. 11 sailors were injured, 2 seriously. The ship is underway to Bahrain for damage assessment and repair. That is the complete account of what 500 drones do when they hit a formation that is trying to protect something more important than itself. The carrier survived because the screen ship stayed. The screen ship stayed because that is precisely what they are designed to do. Here's the most honest thing I can tell you about this operation. The American carriers demonstrated a capability for high-speed evasion, electromagnetic concealment, and active deception that is genuinely impressive and that Iranian operational planners did not have full visibility of before that morning. That demonstration established the specific parameters of the evasion capability with a completeness that makes the next iteration of the drone wave more dangerous than this one was, because the next one will be engineered around the data collected from this one. A drone wave that closes the 7-minute window, faster drones, closer launch positions, or both. A drone wave incorporating seeker filters that distinguish the deception signature from the real ship. A drone wave that targets the screen ships first to remove the deception architecture before the main package arrives. That operation is being planned right now. This morning's data is the planning document. The carriers are running at operational tempo somewhere in the Northern Arabian Sea tonight. Their positions are known to American command. They are not known to Iran. The 11 hours of successful concealment ended when they resumed normal operations. They are visible again. They are operational, and they are operating in a threat environment that this morning permanently changed. Because the adversary that sent 500 drones at them and missed now knows the precise parameters of the evasion that made it a miss. 500 drones, 7 minutes, 2 carriers that disappeared into the ocean for 11 hours. One destroyer, with 3 impacts in its aft superstructure, underway to Bahrain with 11 sailors injured. The carriers are safe tonight. The data that will make the next attempt harder to escape is already in the wrong hands. And somewhere in an Iranian operations center, the analysts reviewing those 11 hours of observation data are not celebrating a miss. They are finishing the planning document for the operation that closes the window.